The galaxy was in chaos. For centuries, humanity had stood at the fringes of galactic civilization, underestimated by alien empires and dismissed as insignificant. But the tide was about to turn. The Great War between the alien coalitions had escalated beyond anything anyone had imagined. Powerful empires, once allies, now turned on one another in a battle for control of the universe. Amid the chaos, humanity, pushed to the brink of extinction, was forced to make a final stand for survival. The alien forces known as the Triumvirate, a coalition of 3 brutal, technologically advanced species, had set their eyes on Earth. For years, the Triumvirate had been systematically eliminating humanity's colonies on distant planets. Earth was the last beacon of hope, but it was about to fall. Humanity had no choice but to fight back, not just for their planet but for the very survival of their species. But what the Triumvirate didn't know was that humanity had one final card to play, their fierce resilience. The people of Earth had never faced an enemy like this before. The Triumvirate was ruthless, armed with weapons of mass destruction and armies that seemed to stretch across the galaxy. Their power was unmatched, and the best humanity had to offer was a fleet of ships cobbled together from old technology and makeshift weapons. Yet in the face of overwhelming odds, humanity found a new resolve. Every man, woman, and child, no matter their status, was ready to join the fight. The human resistance had been formed in secret, gathering intelligence and preparing for the day when the Triumvirate would come. And now, that day had arrived. In the early hours of the morning, the first wave of the enemy fleet arrived at the outskirts of Earth's solar system. They were led by General Vorkuth, a towering figure of malice and cruelty, known across the galaxy for his ruthless efficiency. His orders were simple: destroy Earth and annihilate its defenders. As the enemy ships began to enter the solar system, humanity's defenses were activated. Massive space stations hidden on the moon came to life, their weapons aimed at the approaching fleet. On Earth, fighter pilots scrambled to their ships, ready to engage in the most dangerous battle of their lives. General Vorkuth's fleet began to launch a devastating barrage of plasma fire towards Earth's defenses, but they were met with a surprising counterattack. Humanity's makeshift fleet, though outnumbered, fought with a desperation that no alien force could have predicted. One of the key figures in the battle was Captain Rhea Sampson, a seasoned pilot who had once been part of a military force that had been decimated during the early days of the war. She had seen her family and friends wiped out, and now she was fighting not just for survival but for revenge. Rhea led the charge against the alien invaders, her ship cutting through the void with deadly precision. She was joined by Commander Kale Kor, a former engineer-turned-strategist who had helped design the last line of defense against the Triumvirate. Kale had been one of the architects of the Earth Defense Initiative, a plan to use the ancient superweapons left by an unknown civilization to turn the tide in humanity's favor. He knew it was a long shot, but it was humanity's only hope. As Rhea's fighters engaged in fierce dogfights with the Triumvirate's elite pilots, Kale activated the superweapon systems hidden deep in the Earth's crust. The first wave of destruction was swift and brutal. Massive energy blasts shot up from the planet's surface, disintegrating the first few waves of enemy ships. The Triumvirate's forces had not anticipated such a counterattack, and it sent ripples of confusion through their ranks. For the first time in the war, the alien invaders began to hesitate. But General Vorkuth was not one to be intimidated. He knew that the human resistance was only a temporary nuisance, and he had a plan to destroy them once and for all. As the battle raged on, the human fleet continued to fight valiantly, but the aliens had superior numbers. The tide seemed to shift in favor of the Triumvirate as they pushed forward, breaking through humanity's defenses. But just as hope began to dwindle, a new wave of humanity's most advanced weaponry, the Aegis-class dreadnoughts, emerged from the dark side of the moon. The Aegis-class ships, a new generation of warships with advanced shielding and devastating firepower, turned the tide of the battle. Their arrival was a game-changer, and for the first time, the Triumvirate began to retreat. The humans, now bolstered by their new weaponry, pushed forward with renewed vigor, striking down alien ships and cutting through the heart of the enemy fleet. Rhea and Kale stood on the command deck of the lead Aegis-class ship, watching as the tide of battle shifted. they had no illusions about what was to come. They knew that the Triumvirate was relentless, and this victory was only the beginning. But they also knew one thing: humanity had just made the first step toward victory. They had shown the galaxy that they were no longer weak, no longer helpless. And that alone was enough to give them hope. As the alien ships retreated, the human fleet gathered its forces, preparing for the next phase of the war. The battle was far from over, but one thing was certain: humanity had proven that they were no longer just the underdogs in this galactic conflict. They were now a force to be reckoned with. The victory at the first battle was just a glimmer of hope, but it was enough to ignite the fires of resistance across the galaxy. News of humanity's unexpected success spread like wildfire, sparking rebellions on distant worlds once under the control of the Triumvirate. The galaxy had watched as Earth, a planet once considered primitive and weak, stood tall against the might of one of the most fearsome military coalitions in existence. And now, they were paying attention. But for humanity, the war was far from over. With the Triumvirate regrouping and planning their next move, Earth's leaders knew that the cost of their newfound defiance would be steep. The alien empire would not let this challenge go unanswered. General Vorkuth, humiliated by his first defeat, began mobilizing his forces for a retaliatory strike. But this time, he was not going to underestimate humanity. In the wake of the battle, humanity began to reorganize itself, building a larger, more formidable defense. The Aegis-class ships had proven their worth, but Earth's scientists and engineers knew that they needed more. More ships, more weapons, and most importantly, more allies. The war was no longer just about survival, it was about reclaiming the galaxy from the Triumvirate and showing the universe that humanity had the strength to challenge the most powerful forces in the galaxy. The Earth Defense Initiative began recruiting warriors, scientists, and engineers from all over the galaxy. Those who had once been enslaved or subjugated by the Triumvirate now found themselves at the side of humanity. The outcasts, the rebels, the forgotten races, they all rallied to Earth's banner. Humanity had inspired them with its resilience and tenacity. They had shown the galaxy that the underdog could rise up, and now, they wanted to be a part of the fight. Among the new recruits was Alara, a fierce warrior from the Anathar race, whose people had been crushed under the heel of the Triumvirate's domination for centuries. Her people were known for their physical strength and unparalleled combat skills, and she had been a leader in the underground resistance. Alara had witnessed the destruction of her homeworld, and she knew firsthand the cost of inaction. Now, she had come to Earth with a singular purpose: to take the fight to the Triumvirate and never stop until their reign of terror was over. Alara quickly formed an alliance with Rhea Sampson, the human captain who had led the first successful resistance. Rhea recognized Alara's strength and commitment, and the two forged a bond, fighting side by side against the enemies that sought to destroy them. Together, they formed a powerful leadership core within the human resistance, guiding the newly united forces toward their next move. Meanwhile, Kale Kor had been working tirelessly in the shadows. As a strategist and engineer, he had been designing new technologies to give humanity an edge in the war. One of his projects, the Hypernova Cannon, was a weapon capable of destroying entire fleets with a single shot. It was humanity's secret weapon, but it was still in development. Kale knew that they would need it soon, for the Triumvirate would not wait long before launching their retaliation. The next few months were a blur of preparation and training. Earth's forces grew stronger, with entire battalions of fighters and soldiers being trained for the coming conflict. But as the human resistance gathered strength, General Vorkuth was not idle. He was preparing for war on a scale unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The Triumvirate had a secret weapon of their own, the Leviathan-class dreadnought, a colossal warship capable of laying waste to entire planets. The reports from the intelligence networks indicated that the Triumvirate was constructing this behemoth in the deepest reaches of space, hidden from the prying eyes of their enemies. It was said to be invulnerable to any known weapon. If the Triumvirate's plans succeeded, they would have a weapon that could wipe out entire fleets with ease. Earth had no choice but to stop them before it was too late. As the human resistance mobilized, Rhea and Alara took charge of a daring mission to infiltrate the Triumvirate's supply lines and sabotage the Leviathan-class dreadnought's construction. They led a small strike force deep into the heart of enemy territory, using their stealth and cunning to evade detection. Their objective was simple: destroy the heart of the enemy's fleet before it could be completed. The mission was fraught with danger, and the stakes were higher than ever. If they failed, the Triumvirate would have the upper hand, and humanity's chances of survival would plummet. As Rhea and Alara fought their way through the alien defenses, they encountered terrifying new technologies, each one more advanced than anything humanity had ever faced. The Triumvirate was ruthless, but so was humanity. In a final showdown at the heart of the Leviathan's construction site, Rhea and Alara faced off against General Vorkuth himself. The battle was intense, with both sides suffering heavy losses. But just when it seemed as though the tide was turning in the Triumvirate's favor, Kale activated the hypernova cannon, sending a devastating shockwave through the enemy fleet. The Leviathan-class dreadnought was crippled, its engines exploding in a fiery blaze. The Triumvirate's forces, now thrown into disarray, retreated. Humanity had won another victory, but they knew that the war was far from over. The Triumvirate would return, and they would be ready. This was just the beginning of the last stand of humanity. The victory against the Leviathan-class dreadnought was a monumental achievement for humanity, but it was not enough to end the war. General Vorkuth, humiliated but not defeated, had retreated to his stronghold, regrouping his forces for a final, all-out assault on Earth. His resolve was unwavering. The Triumvirate had suffered heavy losses, but the human resistance had made a grave mistake: they had underestimated the enemy's tenacity and sheer power. The battle for Earth was approaching its climax. The Triumvirate had begun assembling a fleet larger than anything humanity had ever faced. The final confrontation would take place in Earth's orbit, with the fate of the entire galaxy hanging in the balance. Humanity had no choice but to meet the enemy head-on and fight with everything they had. But to do so, they needed more than just weapons. They needed the full support of the galaxy's inhabitants. The galaxy had seen humanity's resilience and strength. Resistance movements had sprung up across the stars, with countless species joining the fight against the Triumvirate's tyranny. It was no longer just about Earth, it was a struggle for freedom, for justice, for the right to live without the crushing boot of oppression. Humanity had united the galaxy in a way no one had ever thought possible. Alara, Rhea, and Kale were at the forefront of this effort, rallying the galaxy's forces and coordinating the final stages of the war. The Allied fleet, a hodgepodge of different species and cultures, had come together to create an army unlike anything the Triumvirate had ever seen. The Aegis-class ships, now mass-produced and distributed across the galaxy, formed the core of humanity's defense. Each ship was equipped with advanced weaponry, shields, and hyperdrive systems capable of moving the fleet at incredible speeds. As the final preparations were made, the Allied forces launched a series of devastating strikes against the Triumvirate's key supply lines and military outposts. The goal was simple: cripple their ability to fight back long enough to deal the final blow. The battle was fierce, but the human resistance, fueled by their desire for survival and vengeance, fought with unmatched determination. But General Vorkuth was not the only threat. His allies, the other two members of the Triumvirate, had begun to play their own hand. The Zoran, a race of insectoid creatures known for their brutality and hive-mind intelligence, had begun mass-producing advanced war drones. The war drones were designed to overwhelm human fighters through sheer numbers, and they were quickly becoming a force to be reckoned with. Then there were the Kaldorians, a race of psychic beings capable of manipulating minds and creating psychic storms that disrupted communications and weapon systems. They had been a powerful tool in the Triumvirate's arsenal, and their abilities made them a terrifying force on the battlefield. The humans had no defense against the Kaldorian psychic storms, and without a way to counter them, the tide of battle seemed to be turning against the resistance. But Kale had a plan, a dangerous and risky one. He had been working on a countermeasure to the Kaldorian psychic storms, a device capable of nullifying their effects. It was called the Nullifier, and it was still in its prototype phase. If it worked, it would give humanity the edge they needed to defeat the Kaldorians and push back the Triumvirate's forces. If it didn't, the human resistance would be utterly doomed. As the final battle loomed, Rhea and Alara led the charge against the Triumvirate's forward fleet, engaging in the most intense space combat humanity had ever seen. The sky above Earth had turned into a fiery battlefield, with laser beams streaking across the void and massive explosions lighting up the darkness. Rhea, piloting her fighter ship, engaged in dogfights with the Zoran war drones, taking down dozens before her ship was hit, causing her to spiral into a dangerous spin. But she fought through the pain, pushing her ship to the limit, and ultimately took down the last of the drones in her sector. Meanwhile, Alara led a ground assault on the Triumvirate's flagship, the Dominion. She stormed the heavily fortified corridors of the enemy ship, cutting down any who stood in her way. She fought with a fierce determination that matched her reputation, but she knew the battle was far from won. The Dominion was protected by a force field and was heavily armed, making it almost impossible to board. But Kale's nullifier was ready. In a desperate gambit, he activated the device, sending a pulse that nullified the Kaldorians' psychic storms across the entire battlefield. The shift in the battle was immediate. With the psychic storms gone, humanity's communications were restored, and the resistance gained the upper hand. The Zoran drones were no longer an insurmountable threat, and the Allied forces began to push forward with renewed vigor. As Rhea and Alara pressed on, they finally reached the Dominion's control room. General Vorkuth stood at the helm, waiting for them. The battle that ensued was brutal, with the fate of the galaxy hanging in the balance. Rhea and Alara fought side by side, using their combined skills to outmaneuver the general's forces. And in the final, climactic moment, Alara delivered the killing blow to General Vorkuth, ending his reign of terror once and for all. With their leader dead and their forces in disarray, the Triumvirate began to retreat, their once mighty fleet broken and scattered. Humanity had won, not just for themselves, but for the galaxy. They had proven that even in the face of overwhelming odds, they would not give up. The final stand of humanity had been a resounding success, and the galaxy would never forget the courage and determination of the human race. But this victory was only the beginning of a new chapter. The galaxy had been liberated, but it would take time to heal, and humanity would be there, standing strong, leading the way. The war was over, but the battle for the galaxy's future had just begun. Humanity had won, but at a tremendous cost. The Triumvirate, their once mighty forces shattered and leaderless, had retreated into the farthest corners of the galaxy. Earth had stood as the beacon of hope, the last defiant flame in a galaxy overrun by oppression. But now, with the alien forces defeated, the question remained: what would the future hold for humanity and their new allies? The galaxy was a fractured place. The Triumvirate had left behind a legacy of devastation, their conquest of worlds leaving scars that would take generations to heal. Planets once flourishing under the iron grip of the alien empire were now in ruins. The aftermath of the war had left many civilizations in disarray, with governments and populations scrambling to pick up the pieces. The rebellion that had united them against the common enemy had now created a power vacuum, and every race, every faction, had their own vision of what the galaxy should become. The leaders of the human resistance knew that the galaxy could not be left to fall into chaos. Humanity's victory had come at the price of countless lives, and with the Triumvirate's fall, the galaxy's people were looking to Earth for guidance. Rhea Sampson, captain of the Earth Defense Fleet, stood on the bridge of one of the Aegis-class dreadnoughts, staring out into the vast emptiness of space. The war was over, but the real challenge was just beginning. Earth's leadership was in disarray. With no clear government to lead, the fractured political systems on Earth had been unable to unite in the face of the post-war challenges. A global council was being formed, but the task was monumental. There was no template for rebuilding a shattered world, no unified vision for how humanity would fit into the new galactic order. As the face of humanity's military might, Rhea knew that Earth's role in the galaxy would be one of both power and responsibility. And yet, it was not only Earth that faced challenges. The allied species that had fought alongside humanity now turned their gaze to the blue planet, each with their own hopes and fears for the future. Alara, the fierce Anathar warrior who had led many of the ground operations during the war, was among the most vocal advocates for unity. She believed that humanity, with its indomitable will to survive and its newfound position as a galactic power, should lead a coalition that could unite the galaxy's fractured species. In secret meetings held aboard human ships, a coalition of leaders and representatives from the most significant allied species gathered. The Keldron, a species of nomadic traders, the Archon, a race of telepathic beings, and the Virians, a genetically engineered race of warriors, all came together to discuss the future. They all recognized that the galaxy, though free from the tyranny of the Triumvirate, was now a chaotic and dangerous place. Without a unified front, the galaxy would fall into an even darker age, one where the strongest would simply impose their will on the rest. Rhea was skeptical. She knew that humanity had been forged in the fires of conflict, and though the war was over, it would take more than alliances to ensure peace. Power struggles were inevitable, and even within their own ranks, trust was something that had to be earned. The galaxy was vast, filled with species and ideologies that had been at odds with each other for millennia. Could humanity truly unite such a diverse and fractured galaxy? One species, however, stood apart from the rest, the Zelrith, a highly secretive race of energy-based beings who had remained neutral throughout the war. No one knew much about them, but they had been watching the conflict from the shadows. The Zelrith had their own agenda, and they were not ones to share their plans with others. Rhea's intelligence officers had warned her that the Zelrith's motives were unclear, and their power could shift the balance of the galaxy if they chose to align themselves with one faction over another. As the human-led council convened to discuss the creation of a new galactic federation, tensions began to rise. The Keldron wanted trade agreements, the Archon demanded a recognition of their telepathic influence, and the Virians pushed for a more militarized union. Alara fought to keep the peace, using her strength and presence to ensure that no faction would dominate the talks. But despite her efforts, there was no denying that the old wounds of the galaxy's history were festering just beneath the surface. Old alliances were shifting, and new rivalries were emerging. Kale Kor, the brilliant engineer and strategist, found himself at the heart of the efforts to rebuild humanity's military forces and infrastructure. While the battles against the Triumvirate were over, Kale knew that peace would be fragile. His team worked tirelessly to integrate alien technology into humanity's own advancements, hoping that by creating a more unified technological front, they could ensure that no single species would be able to dominate the others. But the more he delved into his work, the more he saw how fragile the alliances were, and how tenuous humanity's position really was. The Triumvirate's defeat had not ended the threats to the galaxy. Other alien empires, though initially weakened by the war, were already making moves to fill the power vacuum. The hegemony of Torath, a race of reptilian conquerors, began moving toward the borders of the newly formed coalition. The Drakari Syndicate, a criminal empire with vast reach, began stirring up unrest on the fringes of known space. The Zelrith, who had remained neutral during the war, began making secretive alliances, their true intentions still a mystery. As Rhea, Alara, Kale, and the other leaders navigated the complex political landscape, a new enemy emerged from the depths of space. A force unlike any the galaxy had ever seen, an ancient species that had long been dormant, began to stir. Their arrival would be the ultimate test for humanity and their allies. The galaxy was on the edge of a new chapter, one that would require the greatest sacrifices yet. Rhea stood on the command deck of the newly established Galactic Defense Command, staring at the stars. The war with the Triumvirate was over, but a new fight was about to begin, one that would determine the fate of the galaxy itself. Humanity had earned its place at the table, but now they had to prove they could hold it. The real challenge had only just begun. The galaxy was in a state of uneasy peace, but beneath the surface, tension simmered. The delicate alliances formed during the war with the Triumvirate were beginning to fray, and new factions were emerging from the shadows. Humanity, still recovering from the devastation of war, found itself at the center of a storm of political intrigue, shifting power dynamics, and threats from forces both old and new. Rhea Sampson, captain of the Earth Defense Fleet, now faced a challenge unlike any she had encountered during the war. The galaxy was no longer united against a common enemy, and the fragile alliances held together only by their shared victory were beginning to show signs of strain. As a leader, Rhea had learned to navigate the chaos of war, but the political landscape of the post-war galaxy was far more complex, and much more dangerous. Alara, still fiercely committed to the idea of unity, worked tirelessly to mediate between the different factions. Her people, the Anathar, were strong and proud, but they had suffered greatly at the hands of the Triumvirate. Alara knew that their future depended on a united galaxy, but the path to that unity was proving to be more elusive than ever. Every step forward seemed to be met with resistance, old grudges, long-standing rivalries, and distrust between species that had been forced to ally only out of necessity. Kale Kor, the brilliant engineer and strategist, had turned his attention to the development of new technologies that would secure humanity's position in this new galaxy. The weapons and ships humanity had used to fight the Triumvirate had been impressive, but they were not enough to ensure long-term security. Kale's latest project, a series of advanced AI systems capable of managing fleet operations and intelligence, was humanity's hope for staying ahead of the rising threats. But even Kale understood that technology alone would not solve the galaxy's deeper problems. The alliances were fragile, and the threat of other empires rising to fill the power vacuum left by the Triumvirate loomed larger with each passing day. The most troubling development, however, was the appearance of a new enemy, a race of ancient beings known as the Thalkor. They had long remained hidden in the depths of space, their existence a mystery even to the oldest galactic civilizations. But now, with the fall of the Triumvirate and the power vacuum it had left behind, the Thalkor had begun to stir. Their arrival was a threat unlike any the galaxy had faced before. Unlike the Triumvirate, the Thalkor were not conquerors. They were ancient, primordial beings who existed beyond the comprehension of most species. Their motives were unknown, but their power was undeniable. As the Thalkor began to reveal themselves, humanity found itself once again in the spotlight. The galaxy's newly formed council, still struggling to find its footing, was forced to address the threat posed by these mysterious beings. But just as quickly as the Thalkor emerged, so did the hegemony of Torath, a reptilian empire that had long been lurking on the edge of the galaxy, eyeing Earth's newfound influence with suspicion. The Torath, hungry for power, sought to exploit the chaos and seize control of the galaxy's fractured systems. They had their eyes set on humanity's military technology and strategic position. The Torath had been watching the human resistance during the war, and they knew that Earth's victory over the Triumvirate had made humanity a force to be reckoned with. Rhea knew that humanity would have to take a stand, but it was no longer a matter of defending their homeworld. It was about preserving the fragile peace that had been forged and ensuring that the galaxy did not fall into an even darker age of chaos. The Triumvirate may have been defeated, but new threats had already emerged, and it was clear that the galaxy was not ready for the changes that were coming. The first sign of this new conflict came when the Thalkor made their presence known on the galactic stage. They arrived in immense, organic ships that seemed to materialize from nothing, their technology far beyond anything the galaxy had ever seen. Their ships were capable of manipulating space itself, bending the fabric of the universe to their will. The Thalkor communicated not through words, but through a form of psychic transmission, their messages brief and cryptic. The Thalkor spoke of a long-forgotten prophecy, one that foretold the arrival of a race capable of uniting the galaxy under a single banner. But this prophecy came with a warning: the unification of the galaxy would bring about a great destruction. The Thalkor claimed that their ancient knowledge had led them to this moment, and that humanity's rise was a pivotal point in the galaxy's history. For the first time, humanity was faced with a challenge that was not simply about survival. It was about destiny. The Thalkor believed that humanity had been chosen to lead the galaxy into a new era, but they also warned that doing so would require sacrifices that could cost them everything. Rhea and her allies were left to grapple with this new reality. Was humanity truly destined to lead, or were they being manipulated by a force beyond their understanding? Meanwhile, the Torath, seeing an opportunity to strike while the galaxy was divided, launched a series of aggressive raids along the borders of the newly formed Galactic Federation. Their military prowess was unmatched, and their relentless attacks forced the Allied forces into a defensive position. The Torath were not interested in diplomacy, they wanted power, and they were willing to take it by force. The Allied fleet, still rebuilding and reorganizing after the war with the Triumvirate, found itself stretched thin, unable to mount a proper defense against the Torath onslaught. As the Thalkor and the Torath moved to establish their respective dominance, Rhea, Alara, and Kale found themselves in the midst of a new war, a war not just for survival, but for the future of the galaxy. Each faction had its own vision, its own ideals, and its own goals. Humanity, once the underdog, now stood as a beacon of hope, but also as a target. With so many enemies now surrounding them, the question remained, could humanity truly lead the galaxy into a new era, or would they be consumed by the very forces they had once fought against? The fate of the galaxy hung in the balance. The alliances that had held together during the war were beginning to crumble, and new threats, both ancient and powerful, had emerged from the darkness. The time for peace was over. It was time for the galaxy's next great conflict to begin. The galaxy's fragile peace was beginning to fracture, and humanity stood at the center of a storm that threatened to tear the universe apart. The war with the Triumvirate had brought hope, but now, with the Torath's aggressive expansion and the enigmatic Thalkor pressing their own mysterious agenda, the future of the galaxy seemed more uncertain than ever. Rhea Sampson, Alara, and Kale Kor had faced countless battles, but this was unlike anything they had ever known. The stakes were no longer just about survival, it was about the very destiny of the galaxy itself. The Torath hegemony, emboldened by their successful raids along the Galactic Federation's borders, had begun to consolidate power. Their military forces, fierce and highly disciplined, were spreading like a virus across nearby systems. The Torath had no interest in diplomatic negotiations. They wanted dominance, and they were willing to crush any resistance that stood in their way. Each system they conquered added fuel to the fire, creating a wave of fear that spread through the galaxy's new power structure. Their relentless campaigns left no room for hesitation or mercy, and they were rapidly growing in strength. Humanity, along with their allies, was faced with a daunting challenge. The newly formed Galactic Council had proven to be fragile, unable to unite in the face of this new threat. While some factions rallied around Earth and its leadership, others remained divided, wary of humanity's growing influence. The Keldron, pragmatic traders by nature, had become increasingly distrustful of Earth's intentions. The Archon, once allies in the war, began to question humanity's ability to protect the galaxy from the growing chaos. Even the Virian warriors, who had pledged their loyalty to humanity, started to wonder if the galaxy could ever truly be united. Rhea had always prided herself on her ability to lead in times of war, but now, she found herself navigating a complex political landscape. Every decision she made seemed to carry immense consequences, and the weight of those decisions bore heavily on her shoulders. The war had been won, but it felt like the real battle had just begun. The galaxy was caught between two powers, the Torath, who sought to dominate it, and the Thalkor, whose cryptic intentions were still unclear. The Thalkor, with their ancient, incomprehensible power, had issued a chilling ultimatum: humanity must choose its path carefully. They had revealed to the Galactic Council that they were aware of the ancient prophecy, one that foretold a new order under a single leader who would unite the galaxy. But the Thalkor's warning was even more dire: to achieve such unification would bring unimaginable destruction. They had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations throughout the eons and knew that the balance of the galaxy could be easily tipped into chaos. They were not protectors but observers, waiting for the galaxy to prove its worth. The Thalkor saw something in humanity, something that made them believe that Earth could be the one to lead, but they were unwilling to offer their support unless humanity could demonstrate their ability to overcome their own inner turmoil. As the galaxy trembled on the edge of war, Alara was increasingly convinced that humanity's destiny was tied to the Thalkor's cryptic vision. She believed that the key to defeating the Torath and securing peace lay in humanity's unity, but that unity was fragile. The resistance against the Torath's expansion had begun, with Earth leading the charge, but the question remained: could humanity rally the galaxy's fractured factions in time to stop the Torath before they consumed everything in their path? Meanwhile, Kale was working tirelessly to develop new technologies that could give humanity an edge. His latest creation, a device that could disrupt the Torath's advanced military technology, was humanity's best hope of slowing their momentum. But Kale knew that this would not be enough. The galaxy's greatest problem was not the Torath or even the Thalkor, it was the distrust between the factions. Even now, as humanity sought to form a united front, there were those who feared that a new conflict could arise from their own side. The Galactic Council was divided, and the very foundation that had been built upon the ashes of the Triumvirate was beginning to crack. Rhea, Alara, and Kale, each in their own way, understood the stakes. The galaxy needed a leader, but the path to that leadership was unclear. Rhea had always fought for humanity's survival, but now she was tasked with securing its place in the galaxy. She was no longer just a military leader, she was a symbol of hope, a beacon that could either bring the galaxy together or tear it apart. The Thalkor's prophecy loomed over them, but it was the Torath that posed the immediate threat. The question was no longer whether humanity could survive the galaxy's wars, it was whether humanity could lead the galaxy into a new era of peace or whether they would succumb to the same destruction that had claimed countless civilizations before them. As the Torath's forces marched closer to Earth's borders, Rhea and her allies began to formulate a desperate plan. The galaxy's council had been fractured by infighting, and the factions were no longer united. If humanity was to lead, they would need to confront the Torath alone, but the galaxy's fractured politics meant that Earth could not fight alone. They needed the galaxy to come together, and they needed it now. The Thalkor's warning hung heavy in the air. A new order was on the horizon, and it would either be one of peace or destruction. Humanity had been given a chance to rise, but that rise would come at a cost. Rhea, Alara, and Kale stood at the precipice, ready to make the ultimate choice. They knew that whatever path they took, the consequences would be immense. The fate of the galaxy rested on their shoulders, and the final test was only just beginning. The final days of preparation were upon them. The galaxy stood on the brink of a conflict that could either solidify humanity's place as the leader of a united galaxy or drive it to the brink of annihilation. The Torath hegemony had pushed forward with relentless aggression, their military forces rapidly overtaking system after system. The resistance from the Galactic Council was scattered and ineffectual, with the various factions unable to agree on how to respond to the growing threat. Meanwhile, the enigmatic Thalkor, watching from the shadows, had yet to reveal their true intentions, and their cryptic prophecy still weighed heavily on humanity's mind. Rhea Sampson stood at the command center of the Earth Defense Fleet, staring out into the vast expanse of space. The fleet was ready, but she knew that their success depended not just on military strength, but on something far more intangible, the ability to unite the fractured galaxy under a single cause. A cause that went beyond mere survival or victory in battle. This was about proving that humanity could rise above the chaos and lead, not through conquest or manipulation, but through vision and determination. In a final attempt to gain the support of the galaxy's fractured factions, Rhea convened a last-ditch meeting with the leaders of the Keldron, the Archon, the Virians, and even the elusive Zelrith. The galaxy's unity was fragile, and the growing threat of the Torath had made it clear that they could not afford further division. It was time for humanity to step forward as the guiding light, but to do so, they needed the support of those who had fought alongside them in the war against the Triumvirate. Alara, standing tall as ever, spoke passionately to the assembled leaders. She argued that humanity's strength was not just in its technology or military might, but in its resolve, in its ability to rally together even in the face of overwhelming odds. The Anathar warrior had witnessed firsthand the tenacity of humanity and its capacity for growth. She believed that humanity was not just a symbol of hope for the galaxy, it was the key to unlocking a new era of peace and prosperity. But her words fell on skeptical ears. The Keldron, with their interests in trade and profit, were hesitant. The Archon, with their long history of telepathic influence, were uncertain about placing their trust in a species that had only recently ascended to prominence. Meanwhile, Kale Kor, ever the pragmatic engineer, continued to perfect the weaponry and technologies that might turn the tide in the inevitable confrontation with the Torath. His new fleet-enhancing AI systems were set to give humanity an edge, but he too knew that these technologies alone would not win the war. The galaxy needed more than just power, it needed leadership, unity, and a shared vision for the future. The Torath, sensing that humanity's moment of indecision was coming to a close, launched a full-scale assault on a strategically important system, one that served as a crossroads for galactic trade and communication. The attack was devastating, and the Torath forces, with their overwhelming numbers and military superiority, quickly seized control of the system. The Galactic Council, paralyzed by infighting, could only watch as humanity's allies were pushed to the brink of defeat. It was then that the Thalkor made their move. Without warning, their massive ships, seemingly formed from the very fabric of space itself, materialized near the front lines of the Torath assault. The Thalkor did not attack, but their presence was undeniable. They were watching, waiting for humanity to make its choice. The prophecy they had spoken of, the one that foretold of a leader who would rise to unite the galaxy, was no longer a distant vision. It was now a test. In the heat of battle, with the galaxy's future hanging in the balance, Rhea stood before the Council of Leaders once more. Her voice was steady but filled with the weight of the moment. She told them that this was humanity's chance, not to dominate, but to lead by example. The galaxy needed someone who could inspire hope and unity, someone who could look beyond their own species' interests and guide them all to a better future. Humanity had already faced the worst the galaxy had to offer, and they had survived. Now it was time to rise to the next challenge, to lead with strength, wisdom, and compassion. But that could only happen if the galaxy united under a common cause. Alara spoke next, her voice filled with the fire of a warrior who had seen enough death to last several lifetimes. She reminded the council that the galaxy had already lost so much. The Triumvirate had destroyed entire civilizations. The Torath were not conquerors, they were destroyers. If the galaxy did not unite now, it would be too late. The enemy was not just the Torath, it was the chaos that would follow their unchecked expansion. One by one, the leaders of the fractured factions began to shift. The Keldrin, seeing that humanity's cause was more than just a military one, agreed to support the coalition. The Archon, long wary of human ambition, finally acknowledged the promise of a future where all species could thrive together. Even the Virian warriors, whose honor was above all else, pledged their strength to the cause. The Zelrith, silent and mysterious, remained as observers, but their presence on the battlefield would prove crucial in the days to come. The battle for the galaxy's future had begun, and humanity, at the helm of the united forces, led the charge against the Torath. The Torath were formidable, their armies vast and seemingly unstoppable, but humanity and their allies fought with a resolve that the galaxy had never before seen. The AI systems developed by Kale gave humanity an edge, allowing them to outmaneuver and outthink the Torath forces, turning the tide of battle. The Anathar, with their brutal combat prowess, led the charge on the ground, while the Archon and Keldrin provided critical support in the skies. As the battle raged, the Thalkor remained distant, watching the unfolding events. They had warned of the destruction that would follow if humanity chose to lead, but now they were watching to see if humanity could fulfill their potential. Could they bring peace to the galaxy, or would their actions lead to the same chaos that had consumed so many civilizations before them? In the end, humanity's resolve held firm. The Torath, though powerful, could not withstand the combined might of a united galaxy. With their defeat, the galaxy stood at the threshold of a new era. The galaxy's leadership, once divided, now looked to Earth as the beacon of hope and strength. Rhea Samson, Alara, Kale, and their allies had proven that unity, not power, was the key to the galaxy's future. The Thalkor, having seen humanity's strength and determination, withdrew into the depths of space, their prophecy fulfilled. The galaxy had been united under a new order, one forged by the will of its people. Humanity, though young in comparison to the ancient civilizations of the galaxy, had proven that it was not only capable of surviving the darkness, it could lead the galaxy into a new age of peace. But even as peace settled over the galaxy, the leaders knew that this was just the beginning. The galaxy was vast, and many challenges lay ahead. But now, humanity stood ready to face them, united in purpose and unshaken in resolve. The last stand of humanity had not just been a battle for survival, it had been a victory for the galaxy itself.